on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. Doing our Thursday episode. Bennett, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. I'm good now that we're most of the way through the week, past hump day. It's always a long week when you lose a game. So just excited to get out to Morgantown and watch this team bounce back.
Yeah, I think this is a big game. And so with this, before we dive into everything with this episode, so this is going to be in place of our live episode. I'm going to be traveling Thursday night when we've landed on doing our live episodes. So this is in place of that. So this is going to be a bit of our game preview type of episode. And we'll run through the matchup between Utah and West Virginia. But no live. This is in place of the live. We're still going to do a space, which Bennett is going to run the point on, as he always does. So still be looking for that. But I'll be in the air throughout the night and hopefully landing in time to catch the tail end of the space. So looking forward to that. But yeah, this is going to be our Thursday episode. So again, with this matchup, week 5, Utah versus West Virginia, a first for Utah, making the trip out to Morgantown. This is a game that I think a lot of Utah fans are going to be traveling to, and there's going to be a ton of interest. A lot of Utah fans making the trip out there, and certainly a lot of intrigue around this matchup, with this being the first contest between each program since 2017 and only the third overall. And again, the first trip to Morgantown. So, we're both going to be out there. So Ben, I'd be curious, man, just what are you looking forward to most getting out to Morgantown? One of the top, college towns in the country.
Yeah, Morgantown's always been a bucket list stadium for me. Never thought that I'd get to watch our Utah Utes play in that, but it should be good. I know that West Virginia is coming off a pretty good beatdown. But I mean, it's still Morgantown. It's still West Virginia. This is the main event in their state. Looking forward to them singing Country Roads in the beginning. Before every game, they sing it. They only sing it after the game if they win. So I'm hoping to only hear it once. But yeah, just really excited to see one of the elite college towns and check a bucket list stadium and experience off my bucket list.
Yeah, this is a big one. And not just because it's the first time Utah is traveling out to Morgantown. Obviously, for both programs, started Big 12 conference play last week, unfortunately with a loss. Utah obviously losing to Texas Tech at home 34-10. Meanwhile, West Virginia took the loss to Kansas 41-10. And so this is going to be an important one for both programs looking to get into the win column in conference play. This is certainly an opportunity for Utah when you look at the injury report and how West Virginia has unfortunately been kind of bitten by the injury bug. This is certainly an opportunity for Utah to get right in many ways. With a game against a program that is going to be competitive and is going to be tough. It's not going to be easy. Utah can't just walk into Morgantown and expect to win, but this is the sort of game that, can help you get right in many ways in terms of getting back to a level of execution, staying healthy, getting into the bye week. And so that's going to be important for Utah going into this one, is getting back to building some confidence going into the bye week after an unfortunate, contest last week where you didn't play up to your best. This is the sort of game that can help you kind of find some answers and fine tune some things going into the bye week.
Yeah, and it's an important one as you go into the bye week. Utah has to feel good, right? It can't be a situation where Utah's sitting on this for a couple weeks and you can't get beat by Texas Tech twice. It's a leave no doubt opportunity for Utah to go out there and get right, as you've said. That'll go a long ways for the team heading into the bye week. It'll go a long way for the fan base heading into the bye week. and gives you a chance to come out of the bye week against a tough opponent in Arizona State with a little bit of buzz and a little bit of excitement, a little bit of confidence. So, big game for Utah on Saturday.
Yeah, so big one, and we're gonna break it all down. We're gonna run through some of the matchups, some of the storylines, and all that. But to start this one, we actually want to start with a little Q&A. We got some questions from some of the blockheads, and so excited to hit those. So let's run through a quick Q&A before we dive into the meat and potatoes of the episode.
Yeah, first questions from Babushka. Upon review, do you think Saturday was more caused by bad execution or bad game planning, offensively speaking?
I think the primary issue for Utah against Texas Tech on Saturday was poor execution. I think that was an issue across the board, across a handful of positions. I think a number of groups just didn't play up to the level that they needed to, and and that's not to excuse the play calling or the game plan. There's certainly some things that I'm sure Beck would adjust and try to incorporate a little bit more, right? But I do think it was still a game plan that uh, would have worked had Utah executed, had they avoided, some of the mistakes that they had, particularly in that first half. Going back that first half in particular, it just felt like Utah was starting to find a rhythm, and then boom, a fumble, right? And then again, they get the ball back. The Teo Johnson interception, you get a couple plays, you start moving the ball, and then boom, another fumble. And it just felt like Utah was getting in their own way of establishing a rhythm and sort of grabbing hold of the momentum. So I think again, and it's not to boil it down to the turnovers and the penalty, like we've talked about quite a bit already. There's plenty of other instances where execution wasn't what it needed to be, but those plays speak to the issue the most, and I think that is kind of where I fall on it. I would say probably 75-25 in terms of what could have made the difference for Utah: better execution versus better game planning. I think execution was the big thing for Utah.
Yeah, and I don't need to take too long because I feel like you answered that mostly spot on as far as how I would. There's stuff that you can say about some of the game plan, but overall the opportunities were there. The execution in some crucial moments, it was not there. You look at the fumbles, you look at the interceptions, you look at the penalties, you look at the blocks that were missed on the outside. Um, it felt like an execution thing. It felt like the opportunities were there for Utah to capitalize, but the execution again just wasn't there.
Yeah, I agree. All right, next question. I'll ask this one. This one from Hypno Ute. What is the Rubicon for the season? What benchmark will dictate a failed season or a successful season?
Yeah, I feel like coming into the season, the bar for Utah was to get to Arlington, and in a lot of ways, still is. That's the product of the recent success Utah has seen. When you get to the Pac-12 championship over and over again, it starts to become the norm and the expectation. So it's totally fair for that to still be a benchmark. Would I consider it a failed season if Utah didn't get to Arlington? Would like to see something along the lines of how BYU and Colorado, they missed Arlington but put together pretty solid seasons. They had 2 conference losses. So did the teams that actually played in Arlington. So if Utah's to miss Arlington, I'd need to see it be like that to not feel totally let down. But I think a 9-3 season is still nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like I said all off season, right? My prediction for this season was an 8-4, 9-3 type of year. And if you get the plays If you get progress from certain individuals, plays made by individuals, certain bounces going your way, that can get you to 10, 11 wins. And so this is kind of where I'm still at with this team. We didn't get those plays. We had some bounces against Texas Tech, or Utah had some bounces, but also had a number of bounces go the opposite way. And so, yeah, I'm with you there. I think 9-3 is kind of the bar in terms of that Rubicon, right? And so I think that's the mark. I'm with you there.
Yeah, we got one from West G. Do you think the staff knew John Henry Daly would be a monster after fall camp and were playing coy with the media? Or is this a genuine surprise even after fall camp?
Yeah, I think they knew. I think they had an idea of what John Henry Daly was going to be this season. It was interesting, in fall camp particular. I remember a number of conversations where it was, it was all the talk was about Cash Dillon. It was about Lance Holzclaw and those guys. And John Henry Daly, he was like, he's had a nice camp, but it was never like he's going to be the guy. He's going to be the starter. And that was, across a handful of conversations, but I think it was mostly Utah being pretty cool. I think they had an idea given the burst at the snap, his motor. There were indicators I'm sure that they saw where they knew. And again in fall camp, you're going up against two really good offensive tackles, right? So I'm sure they had a pretty good idea of what they had in that group.
Yeah, I'm going to take Wes's question one step further. How about Jackson Benny? Think
Ooh,
I
I
look at
think
those two as the biggest surprises. What are your thoughts on Jackson Benny?
Yeah, I mean, the conversation started with Benny back in spring ball, right? Like, unfortunately now Rabbit Evans is injured, but beyond Rabbit, a lot of the talk on that defense side of the ball was around Jackson Benny and sort of his emergence in that defensive secondary. So I think Utah felt optimistic, and there's still a lot of things that Benny needs to improve on, right? He needs to tighten up, on the play to play, down to down type of coverage stuff. But in terms of his playmaking and what he's brought there, capitalizing on those opportunities, that's been a pleasant surprise for us. Probably not so much for the coaches, but for us certainly.
Okay. Next question. Big Wheeze 77. Do you anticipate Utah will utilize more design throws outside the pocket for Dampier?
I know that I would. I know that I would try to get Dampier out of the pocket on the move, right? In some of those rollouts and sprint outs and that sort of thing. That was an element of Beck's offense last year, was getting him out into those designed mobile pockets, right? Having an escort out there with him and that type of thing, because it also becomes the sort of thing where if nothing's there, he's got a lead blocker out in front of him and he can use his legs. So I anticipate that being something that we see. I don't know how soon or if we'll see it for certain. I don't know, but I anticipate that being something that we see at some point this season.
Yeah, and this is something we touched on in the space on Monday night. Said we like to see more of that. He just feels a lot more comfortable when he's moving around. He doesn't like standing still. You can watch pretty much every one of his dropbacks, and he likes to move around. You think of the play that I think of is he starts to take off like he's going to run, and then that pulls in a guy that's right there covering Bentley's space, and that opened the big play for the touchdown drive for Utah. So would like to see some of that too, like act like he's going to take off and then quick dump
Yep.
and see what can happen there. So
That is another thing that was pretty prominent in Beck's offense last year with Dampier, was sort of that, you know, design QB run RPO type look where he gives that little power fake, right? And then pulls up and throws it over the top of the defense. So there's still things that they can do and bring into the playbook that I think will emphasize the threat of Dampier and the run game. So we'll see. Next one, I've got the next question here. This one from Ragnar Ute. Obviously, we saw the defense run out of steam about 8 minutes too soon. Hypothetically, if Lander, Smith, and Benny aren't taking snaps on offense, do you think the defense has enough juice to hold on another series or two?
Yeah, I think snap count hasn't been an issue for these guys. I know that's monitored pretty closely. They're not getting Travis Hunter levels of usage.
Right.
So I would say no. That's also, three guys on the defense. It's a lot more than that. Uh, with that being said, I I'd like to see them be more prominent on the defensive side of the ball. Benny is maybe who I like the most to play two ways. I think he stretches the field in ways that we really need. As far as Lander goes, obviously you lose Hunter Andrews in the tight end room, so you get a little thinner there. But I could see Lander making sense, but interested to see who steps up there. I know Otto Tia has been a name that's been thrown around. Be interested to see if JJ starts getting looks at that position again. But starting to go off the beaten path with the question, my answer is no. I don't think that them focusing solely on defense would have given the defense enough juice to hold on another series or two.
Yeah, that's a tough one, right? I think there's so much more than going on in those final 8 minutes than just those three, and those three having the extra juice to get it done, right? I think that's kind of the point here is it was the entire defense. It wasn't just those three. Lander played 74 snaps defensively, 14 snaps on offense. He led the way in terms of snap count for the team. Smith only played 57 snaps on defense, 14 on offense. And then Benny played 48 and 11 defense offense. So still, with Snowden and Benny, they're keeping that snap count pretty low. With Lander, he's getting some work, and maybe that's an area that could have benefited Utah having Lander, without those 14 additional snaps. But I don't think I don't think those snaps alone make the difference in the final 8 minutes. Maybe it makes a difference on a play or two, and that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know that it makes that big of a difference where you're eliminating, a touchdown drive or two or whatever whatever it ends up being over the final three. I don't think it makes that big of a difference. All right, let's dive into the game now. Let's look ahead to West Virginia, some of the key storylines here, and then some of the matchups that we're going to be looking at. So, with this game again, like I mentioned, both teams are actually coming off a loss in week 4, the first conference game for both programs, and this is a bounce back opportunity for both teams. And Utah in particular, given the stage that they were on last week and the unfortunate result on the field with that 34-10 loss, I think this is really, really important, really, really vital for Utah to have a resounding response, after last week's result. And Whittingham's program, they've typically done a pretty good job of, bouncing back after losses, but last year taught us that you can't just take it for granted. Right. So this is a game that Utah can't just walk into Morgantown, even with the injury list that the Mountaineers are currently dealing with. You can't just expect to go in there and get a comfortable win. Utah has to go into that stadium, into Morgantown, and put their best foot forward. And I think that's going to be the key. I want to see a quick start. I want to see a strong response in terms of the execution for Utah and how clean they are. I think that's going to be a key storyline going into this game is what sort of response do we see from Utah and even West Virginia on the other side of the ball.
Yeah, another thing that interested in seeing is just not seeing, but something that's necessary is that fan mindset reset. So, we all know that the players and the coaches, they catch what goes on social media, and there's small segments of the fan base that are still dragging feet, but I think overall the fans have been really good about moving on from last week's frustrations and focusing on what's ahead. When we run the post game, and we get into the space, and you start hearing from Utah fans, and little bit of sky is falling on Saturday, which is natural after a loss, especially with the offensive woes Utah has seen the last couple of years. A lot of people feeling like that's back, and then you get into the space on Monday, and you start talking with the fans, and they start to sing a little bit of different tune as they digest that loss, and they start to see that that's one game against potentially, as it stands right now, the best team in the Big 12, and you start to realize, hey, Utah was down by 3 points with 8 minutes to go. Utah had plenty of opportunities to be in that game, take that game. It felt like it was there for the taking the whole time, and dwelling on Texas Tech isn't going to help anything. We have now Utah's moving into West Virginia, and it's an opportunity to get right, get back on track, and go into the bye week 4-1, come out with an opportunity against a good Arizona State team, and you start rattling off wins, and you forget about things pretty quickly. If Utah sits at, it all starts this week with rattling off wins. If Utah's able to get 3 in a row here, and they're sitting at 6-1 after the Utah BYU game in Provo, I think everybody in the fan base would be okay with that 6-1 mark. So everything's still in front of Utah, and it's important to keep that in mind and to keep that mindset, because again, the overall fan sentiment, that's going to leak into the locker room, and the players and the coaches, they see that, they feel that, they feed off of that. So overall, though, good to see Utah fans pulling it together.
Yeah, and again, I think the response this week from Utah, I think, will play a big role in terms of the vibes, for the fans and the fan base and all of that, in sort of reinstilling some optimism and confidence in this team moving forward. And then the final thing here, obviously, is going to be the spotlight on the quarterback position, and for very different reasons, right? With West Virginia, they're dealing with pretty significant injury news with Nico Marchiol and sort of his foot injury and what he's dealing with. What is that position going to look like with Jalen Henderson potentially being the guy to lead the Mountaineers this weekend? And then with Devin Dampier, obviously. Again, going back to last week, the spotlight was on Utah. It was on Dampier, and he didn't have his best game. And I think obviously, we've now officially learned that there was an injury that kept Dampier out of practice last week. That probably played a role in how he performed on Saturday. It does sound like he's in a better place with his injury, and it sounds like he has practiced, and I'm curious what sort of impact that is going to have. So there's going to be a spotlight, on Dampier and on this quarterback position in this game, and I think that's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out this week. And again, we're going to talk a lot about Dampier and sort of the matchup here, but I think that's going to be an interesting one to monitor this weekend. So let's